Hey everybody, welcome back to Actually Useful, the show where we diagnose what's wrong with the internet and we chat with the good folks who are trying to make it better. How has everybody's week been so far, Josh?
Oh, just trying to get through the slow collapse of our society. But had a decent weekend. Got to go to a lovely Quaker meeting in Pasadena. Ariel, do we have any news for our listeners today?
Yeah, we actually have a couple updates on episodes and topics we've covered before. So we also devoted a whole episode to Palantir a couple episodes back and all their technology, which is notoriously hard to unpack. And we got a lot of that reporting from 404 Media, who has broken a couple really critical stories about the tech that Palantir uses. And they have another one. So this morning they released an article about Elite, Palantir's new app made for and used by ICE. It stands for Enhanced Leads Identification and Targeting for Enforcement. So basically, it is a file that has dossiers on a bunch of people. It receives people's information, like addresses, name. It receives it from the Department of Health and Human Services, along with some other sources. It has information, so everybody has a dossier that includes your name, ID, your alien ID, which is a unique code given by the government to immigrants, date of birth, full address. Palantir has made this thing called an address confidence score, which is that ICE will send out skip tracers, private investigators, and bounty hunters to verify people's addresses to confirm that the seed data in Palantir's technology is guessing addresses correctly. So it'll tell you 97%, this is definitely where that person lives. And then the other tool that it has in this app is a geospatial lead sourcing tab, which is basically ICE can go into a neighborhood, pull up a map and see a map of all the people that they're trying to target. And they call it a target rich environment instead of, a neighborhood, which is what it is. And also I found out from this article on the Homeland Security's website, this article linked to one of the press releases from the Department of Homeland Security. And it has a bunch of people who were kidnapped by ICE, detained by ICE, has their photo, their ID, their government name, their age, their criminal past, which may or may not be true, and just posted on the website. The government's just out here doxing people. So it feels, Josh and I talk about this where sometimes it feels kind of crazy to come on this podcast and not talk about the things. Obviously all I have been reading in the news this week is about ICE. I've been talking to my own community about it. So it's kind of weird to come on here sometimes and be well, we have to talk about tech. And I just think this proves the point that tech is so intertwined with every aspect of our life.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to highlight something we mentioned in our last episode about the new age of sexism, which is kind of how AI is making a lot of old sexist problems even worse. But Grok has this ability to undress any photo. So you can post a picture and then people in the comments will be at Grok, put this woman in a bikini. And it's creating tons of just unconsensual porn of public individuals or private individuals, and is also making child porn. It's supposed to not work under people who are 18, but it clearly is. Elon Musk is saying he knew nothing about this, but that's directly contradicted by the fact that he literally used Grok to put himself in a bikini and then posted laughing emojis at it. So, I mean, he's just such a tool, but he's lying through his teeth here. Something that's heartening is that this is at least starting to get picked up by some more legit outlets. So The Guardian did an article on this, The Atlantic, and it seems like this is getting the attention it deserves. So hopefully something's going to get done about it. But this does kind of interestingly lead into our conversation today. We're going to be chatting about AI governance and how companies can build guardrails around the AI that they deploy.
Yeah, kind of a bummer news segment, but today we have a really fun guest. We have Allen Martinez here. Allen, welcome. We're going to have a good conversation about the do's and don'ts of AI in a way that our listeners can understand. Allen, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do and how you work to make AI more sensible.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. And I hope to be the light for the program after all that news.
You will
I would say
be.
Before we go anywhere, let me tell you where I'm coming from. First of all, everyone's shipping AI right now, agents, automations, chatbots, copilots, right? And most of it works fine in the demo and it looks great in the quarterly deck, but almost nobody can tell you what any of it is allowed to promise, refuse, or improvise, right? So what decisions can it make? What commitments can it create? And most companies have no idea.
Totally.
So I'm spending my time with teams who just figured this out and realize that it is a problem indeed, usually after something's broke. So this isn't a conversation about how to crank out more content faster. It's more about what happens when AI agents start making commitments in your company's name and nobody's agreed on the rules. Right now, everyone's debugging the code and nobody wrote the spec yet. So companies are shipping probabilistic systems into production without ever deciding what those systems are allowed to promise, refuse, or improvise. So they're building fast, but they're not building conscious. And so most AI conversations start at the tool layer. What should I use? How do I prompt it? And those are real questions, but they're really downstream from what my book is about. So what I work on is the layer before you deploy anything, the actual logic that has to be coded out, right? The architecture that determines whether your AI systems compound advantage or contradict each other. So my job is helping teams write the spec that they skipped. And I wrote a book about it, and it's called The Brand Experience AI Operating System. And it maps the 3 gaps I'm about to walk through with you guys, and the collision patterns they create and the architecture for fixing them before they explode.
That's an awesome background on your perspective. And so with your work at Noble Digital, tell us a little bit about who you work with, who from an organization calls you in, what kinds of questions do they come to you with? Give us a little bit about that background.
Right now it's all different directions, but really the focus is mid-market. And the reason it's mid-market is because mid-market have enough employees and enough collisions happening inside the company where they realize they have to fix this. Because, if you do 2 or 3 AI agents, you probably won't feel what I'm talking about yet. But when you have 10 or 20, you'll have hundreds of collisions happening, and you can't, after a point, you won't be able to manually fix those. And it'll be not worth the time spent because it'll be wasted time. And now humans are acting like robots instead of doing the actual work they should be doing. So none of this is really quite automated the way it should be yet. It's not scaled out correctly.
So before we get deeper into this conversation, can you walk us through kind of these 3 areas you've identified that are common pitfalls for companies as they're implementing their AI?
Yeah, let me just talk about the 3 gaps as a high overview, and we can kind of dig in each one. But when I analyze about 100 AI deployments, the wins and the disasters, 3 gaps showed up every time. Your boss and your team probably haven't named them yet, but they're living with them. So the first one is the governance gap. And this is the one that gets someone fired, because right now your company has AI tools running that AI IT doesn't know about, legal hasn't approved, and finance isn't tracking. So for example, marketing added a content generator, sales plugged in an email assistant, and then someone in support built a bot over the weekend because the official approval takes 4 months internally. So they're kind of doing it under the radar. And so everyone knows this is happening, but no one says it out loud. But I'm calling this the shadow ledger. And the shadow ledger is invisible inventory of AI commitments happening in your company's name. So every tool is making promises, setting expectations, and creating obligations that nobody is tracking. And I call that unconscious AI, because tools are multiplying while nobody tracks what they're promising. And so your job is to figure out how big your shadow ledger is before leadership discovers the hard way. That's the first one. The second is the identity gap. So your brand voice lives in a PDF somewhere, maybe a style guide or a deck from 2019. But your AI doesn't read PDFs really. It pattern matches on the internet, which has mediocre to terrible taste. So to get the output that's technically correct, but it's emotionally wrong is the problem. So you're coming out generic, safe, kind of vanilla. And the thing is that it makes customers say, this could be any company. And so you kind of lose your brand identity. And the third one is the accountability gap. When something goes wrong, can you prove what happened, right? And so most teams are reverse engineering their own systems from Slack threads and ticket notes, right? I think the bot said this, and check the logs maybe, but there's no receipts, so there's no evidence layer. So it's just guesswork after the fact. And that's unconscious AI, because there's no record of what the system believed or why it decided what it decided. So going conscious means having answers to all 3 before the crisis forces you to find them.
One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of companies that I find really surprising, because a lot of times it's companies that I super respect working with, is I feel like there's a collective concussedness to the tech industry right now, where instead of building products the way that we've always built products, which is to say, what are the big problems that we should fix and how should we solve them? People are just saying, well, I need to put AI in my product and I don't know where it should go, but I definitely want to use it. In your experience, what is it that makes a company feel like they need to reach for it in this way that is in a way I've never seen before, just not a strategic way of thinking, right? Where like there's so many companies that are saying we need the AI and we need to shove it wherever we can. And that's not a good like order of operations to build a product. So what causes that?
Well, what really causes it is not having a point of view before you go in and build it. And my process is not really that different than brand strategy, because brand strategy really comes from the logic and the qualitative aspect, like getting into the brain of leadership and saying, what do you really want to be? And that's always the first question in a brand strategy engagement. But I believe the actual, what they should be going for in a strategic sense instead of a tactical sense is brand advantage, right? And really growing the brand in the right way versus building tactical things that might work until they don't work because you're going to start getting collisions. And I don't think people have quite felt that yet. The regulatory feds haven't. We can get into that too for a second. There was this whole mandate about we're going to have regulation on AI, and that went away with this new administration. And so everyone was like, oh, we don't have to worry about that as much anymore. But then California and Colorado are now bringing that back. So I would still say to that, don't do it because of regulations. Do it because you need to do it inside of your company. That's more important to understand because you want control over this.
It's interesting you bring that up because I was thinking about this, as I was getting ready this morning and thinking about the episode, I just kept thinking about how, there's things that AI is really good at and there's things that AI is not good at and it's not optimized for. AI is optimized to fill in blanks. It is an assumptive engine and it works best in use cases where useful is good enough, right? Is it always useful? That's a different discussion. But like the way that it is made is that it is for instances where you can get away with good enough. It is not made for precision because it is intentionally going to change every time you ask it a different question. And so anything that's a repeatable process that needs to be precise over just useful is a really hard application for AI. I was like building this dashboard that was really just a dashboard of simple algebra problems of how the product is being used, right? We're just tracking metrics here. And someone asked if I should use AI for it. And I was like, for what? Like, this is just algebra here. And it's not something that AI is good at. And also to your point, the other problem that makes AI difficult is that like anytime it's a black box. So with regulation, like if you have something where we know regulation is going to happen, is it going to happen in the next 3 years? I don't know, but it's definitely going to happen on AI. And so I think even from a business standpoint, like why would you want something that is such a black box that you couldn't prove it to the regulators or you couldn't track what's happening in it? Why would you want that,
Agreed. So what we're talking about is really that, AI is probabilistic. And the problem is a lot of engineers implementing AI are putting deterministic wrappers on what they're building. I think here's the leverage point for anyone trying to fix this and to move it from a black box to a glass box is that most AI systems right now are opaque, right? You put something in and magic happens, something comes out, nobody can explain the middle. And that's fine for generating a poem or whatever, right? It's terrifying when you're making promises to customers or decisions that affect people's lives, like in healthcare. So if a human employee makes a bad call, you can at least ask them, what were you thinking? What did you see? What did you believe at the time? And with AI, most companies have no idea. They have logs of inputs and outputs, but no explanation of the reasoning in between, no record of what values or rules, if any, were applied. So when a regulator or a journalist or an angry customer says, why did your system do that? Most teams are going to be shrugging because they're reverse engineering their own system for scraps. And the whole point of what I'm building is to create that glass box, a receipt for every decision, an evidence layer that says, here's the rule I followed, and here's the data I looked at, and here's what I refuse to do. And this isn't just about compliance, it's about agency, right? Yeah. And I think receipts make manipulation harder, not easier, because now you can have an audit of what the machine was optimizing for.
Yeah, and not following this process can have really big consequences the more that you add up your shadow ledger. So I know in your book you talk about a really big mistake Zillow made. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Zillow story. If you want to really hear what unconscious AI looks like at scale, we can look at Zillow. Zillow had an AI-powered home buying program called Zillow Offers. The algorithm would estimate home values and automatically make offers. It sounds smart. You would scale your purchasing with machine precision, but the algorithm was making commitments the business couldn't keep. It was buying homes at prices that didn't really reflect actual market conditions, and it was moving fast and closing deals and accumulating inventory. And what happened is that nobody inside the company had the visibility into how those pricing decisions were being made until they were sitting on 7,000 homes they'd overpaid for. So they shut down the program. they laid off like 25% of the company, and they wrote off $500 million. So that wasn't a model accuracy problem. That was a governance problem. The AI was making promises at scale without any human checkpoint saying, wait, this is actually makes sense for us right now. And then nobody had the authority to stop it. So, and if they did, they probably didn't see what was happening fast enough to use it. So again, that's the shadow ledger compounding until it explodes. And the scary part is that Zillow's a tech company. They had data teams. They have plenty of money to play with. This is not some small startup, right? They had engineers, and they still couldn't see the iceberg until they hit it.
I like your approach here because, you know, with these companies at the scale we're talking about, governance for each individual transaction there, right, isn't feasible. So you need to be thinking at a higher level of abstraction about what are the guardrails we're going to implement. Can you walk us through, like, concretely, what are some of these guardrails that companies can implement to avoid these massive headaches, like losing tons of market value from, I think I saw the CEO's house. The Zillow estimate was off by like 40% of the CEO of Zillow's own house. It messed up that badly.
Right. Well, I mean, what's happening is that everyone's building without vision. So, you know, here's like a diagnostic you can run in your head right now. Most companies are building AI systems technically. They're checking off boxes, right? But each one works in isolation, and each one was somebody's project. Each one shipped on time, right? But nobody asked the upstream question of, what are we trying to be? And so here's how you know you're building out without vision. It's like, you know, your marketing and your sales support all have AI tools, and none of them know each other, and each of them has their own prompt, has its own personality and its own definition of what brand sounds like. And so, you know, as far as like your question is, like, how do we do this? It has to do with creating rules, but not so like constrained that it's like Boolean logic, jumping to Boolean logic already. But not so open-ended of using the models right out of the box, so to speak. There has to be this process, which is really a strategy session. It's a lot of intake, and my process has to do with like understanding what. And again, going back to values and mission statement, all that stuff becomes important now because it used to sit like in a folder somewhere on someone, you know, in someone's computer, and now we can actually make it way more actionable than ever before because your AI actually needs that fuel to inform what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Do you have a point of view on like, so there's a strategy session, you know, you can help walk brands through this, but like in a company, in an organization, a lot of times the way these things will happen is like somebody on the leadership team tells a PM and an engineer like, hey, we want to implement AI. And whether it's a good use case or not, the PM and the engineer and the designer potentially now own this. If we were working in your model where we're thinking more forward and we're having more vision, who are the people in an organization that you think would need to be making those decisions and do this due diligence around governance?
In the org, who should own this? My take is it shouldn't live with any single department because someone needs to be able to be named the human who can say stop, right? And right now, AI implementations are scattered, right? They all have their own departments and they're all doing different things and experimenting with different things. So each team has to optimize for their own KPIs, but nobody's optimizing for coherence across the whole customer journey, you know, and that's why I have this whole system's wrapped inside the brand experience framework. And if you don't know what that is, some people might not realize that customer experience and user experience is downstream from brand experience, which captures all of that, including AI experience and employee experience. So the answer, I don't think, is a committee. It's committees, because what happens with the committees is they diffuse accountability, right? When everyone owns it, nobody owns it. So decisions take months. And by the time the committee approves something, 3 more shadow tools have been deployed, right? So what you need is a constitutional layer that sits above the tools, a shared set of rules, and really more principles than rules, because principles will give the AI more breathing room to really leverage that probabilistic muscle that it actually has. I'm not judging that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. A lot of times you are creating something like from a problem in a strategy like statement and turning it into a whole experience, right? And constitutional layer that sits above the tools is like helping that be expanded and actually have like you're basically creating a world that you can live within, right? Because these people have to interact with this AI every single day. But going back to what I was saying is that you need to name a human with authority, because if someone can look at your deployment and say this violates our principle, it doesn't ship, and it can't be a veto by committee, because a veto that means no one's going to own the decision. So I think that's going to be really important. And I think when we're talking about this constitution, traditional software is a script. If, then, that, right? It's very comforting, but it's also very rigid. And AI is more like an improv actor, right? You give it character, situation, and objective, and it riffs, right? And it's going to get better at this. If you try to govern AI purely with scripts, you're going to choke off the one thing that makes it useful, which is its ability to adapt to in weird situations, right?
Yeah.
But if you give it absolute freedom, you get chaos. So the middle path is the Constitution I'm talking about. Here's the lines you never cross. Here's the trade-offs we care about. And here's how we weigh in to be helpful against, like things like don't overpromise and against like don't waste someone's time, for example. So that's what I mean by Constitution, not a legal document, but like a hierarchy of values the system uses when the world throws it something it hasn't seen before. And I would say, going to the real world, in real life, humans do this instinctively, right? We know I could technically say yes to this, but it would feel cringe, right? And that's just taste operating as a constraint. We don't think about it, but this is what's going on in a split second in our mind. And AI needs to be encoded with some version of that gut check, or it will happily optimize its way into behavior you never meant to endorse. And this isn't theory, by the way. Anthropic built constitutional AI because prompt engineering doesn't scale, right? Thousands of specific rules break, and then they end up conflicting with each other, and edge cases slip through. So a small set of principles in the system, that can use self-critique will definitely scale, and it becomes more transparent.
How could somebody who is maybe more junior in the organization and is listening to this podcast and is like, I want to get Allen, I want to follow Allen's way. How can they convince someone higher up at the organization that it's worth at least investing in this process? If
you're going to be a champion in your company and you want to lead this, I would say get the book, because the book gives you the whole roadmap of exactly how to do that. The first chapter is talking to the CFO, we need to open up the purse and understand that. And I think right now, look, let's remember early days of the website, right? Early websites didn't have a CMS to structure, and it didn't have a line item in the budget yet. That came later. And AI is starting to get that line item now, but I don't think people understand what the line items should be yet. I think they're just looking at models at face value, and they're looking downstream, and they need to start looking upstream, because that upstream process, the strategy will actually scope everything out and will inform what should the budget be, because now you're tethering it to actual goals inside the company.
If you like Actually Useful, check out Mama Tusa, our sister show on the Industry Plant Network. It's a podcast about birth work, parenting, and women's stories of resilience. Every episode, licensed midwife Atusa Benji sits down with mothers, midwives, doctors, and doulas to talk about everything from delivering babies to the challenges women face receiving healthcare in the U.S. It's honest and raw, but it always leaves you feeling hopeful. You can check out my favorite episode, which is called The Link Between Postpartum Depletion Syndrome and Menopause. It's really interesting. It connects women's experiences in birth to health outcomes later in life. It has tips for new moms and partners to take care of themselves postpartum, and it has suggestions for how to better support birthing people as a society, something we should all be focused on. Check it out Tuesdays wherever you listen.
So this is the segment that I like to call an audio engineer with no technical background asks a really stupid question. But for our audience that is not maybe on the development side, can you help me understand this and walk me through this? So you have AI models, maybe someone's using ChatGPT for something, or Claude, or whatever you have. And in the current system that you're saying is unsustainable, right? You have different teams who are using these solutions for different tasks. Walk me through how you take something like that. I mean, are you just building constraints around a system? Are you kind of working with more enterprise software? How does that on a granular level work, where you're preventing it from going down certain paths?
Yeah, this solution is platform agnostic. And so a test you can run tomorrow, find your company's 3 most customer-facing AI tools, your marketing bot, support bot, whatever, sales assistant, and then just ask one question. Can they contradict each other? If marketing AI can promise something that support AI won't honor, you're scaling distrust. And that's a collision waiting to happen. It's that simple. Take screenshots, put them on one slide, then the promise from marketing, the response from support, side by side, show the slide to your boss. That's the oh shit moment, because that's when governance stops being theoretical. The internet got weird because we scaled systems before we agreed on the rules, right? AI is in that same moment again, except the systems can speak and make commitments in our name now, which is new, right? So conscious AI is choosing the rules now, right? What it can promise, what it refuses, and how you prove it later. So if you can't produce a receipt for a high stakes decision, you're still doing it unconsciously. It's that simple.
We've talked a lot so far, and this makes sense from your brand background, but like we've talked a lot about, making decisions at sort of the top of the funnel in terms of what the AI product is, the strategy, the vision, the point of view, the identity. So like broadly speaking, I have noticed a trend in the tech industry, which is that I think companies are doing a lot less user acceptance testing now than they've ever done before. And there's some reasons for that. I think that programmatic QA tools are getting a lot better. It's a lot easier to run unit testing. Like there's just other solutions for testing an end product. But it is interesting that like AI poses a new user acceptance testing challenge. So like user acceptance testing for our listeners is when usually a product manager, maybe an engineer, maybe somebody else in the organization, when something is rolled out and it's just about to get to production and released to consumers, you use it to try to go through scenarios of how a user might use it. And one of the problems that happens in UAT is these collision type things where like I have noticed even when organizations do user acceptance testing, there's often a problem where they're doing it in their identity as someone who uses the site like an employee instead of like a user. So a lot of times, like we see this with pop-ups, right? That employees often are not getting the same user experience when it comes to all the modals that fire because they've seen them before. They're cookied. I'm curious if you have any guidelines or advice for the user acceptance challenge of AI, considering that because it is going to be a different experience for every person in the organization. And a lot of times they're coming as an employee who's used the tool a lot more than an actual customer would have.
So, you're talking about the difference between internal workflows and external workflows. I would say, look, let's just start with this. If you're new to AI and you really want to get this going and maybe you're going to knock on my door, I would say, let's do internal workflows first. Why? Because you will suffer less embarrassment when something goes wrong. You can all laugh it off internally and be like, oh, okay, we got to fix that. And this is a good way to practice. So I would say, and by the way, you might find that there's higher ROI on internal workflows than external workflows, believe it or not. It really depends on the company, but I've seen that before. So, but that way you can actually do that practice. You can actually, pretend and play. Having said that, you're right. Like this is a voice you have to live with. It's like that persona has to be crafted as well. It might be different than the external facing sales and marketing voice, right? And that's okay. Maybe there's a worker voice that's a little more neutral. These are just decisions to be made. It's like, you want that? We'll give it to you. If the employees complain, like, I hate this voice, I don't like the way it feels, like, great, let's tune it up. Let's make it exactly how you want. You want to do that by department by department, different voices to be unique to what they want to hear. Like, you can do that too. It's all a decision to be made. You can do it this any way you want. It's all custom build pretty much. What I'm trying to say is like, try to avoid what comes out of the box as is, scenario. And you want to try to like make it yours. You want to customize that as soon as possible. And one example for an external face, I was thinking about Duolingo because Duolingo has an AI character named Duo. It's a little green owl, but it's not just a mascot. It has personality. It's playful. It's slightly passive aggressive. It's weirdly motivating. And when you miss the lessons, Duo guilt trips you, right? And you hit a streak. Duo celebrates like a hype man. That's not prompt engineering. That's identity architecture. Someone decided who Duo is at some point. Now, whether you like the personality and whether it's right for brands, that's all interchangeable. That's not a big, huge decision. Like, that's easy to correct. It's just a matter of what is that point of view? Again, what's the taste level of what we're going after? Because it's all going to come down to taste. All the actual execution is going to get easier and better. And so we're going to have, again, what is your vision for the company? Where do you want to be and how do you want to grow? Because that's going to become more important as this hard stuff gets easier to execute.
I did enjoy the example you gave in chapter 1 of making different promises to a VP through, someone saying you're being upgraded to our white glove service and then getting a support ticket that's basically just like, check out our wiki for your answer. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, maybe marketing sends an email to a high-end customer. And in the book, it was like maybe $500,000 contract, right, with an enterprise. And it promises maybe white glove service. And then sales counters with another message that has to do with assuming that it's a regular customer and didn't even cover that white glove service. And then the support chat bot was like, oh, you have a question? Here's our FAQs. And it's kind of like just neglecting the customer. And that all happened in like a matter of seconds for the customer because it just collapsed and all the collisions are all appearing all at once. And that's where your ROI goes down. So you spent all that money on AI, but you didn't figure out this whole workflow, like the way this user journey, then you're going to be screwed if you don't figure that out up front.
Right. And then you get lost in, oh, look at all these gains. We've saved 10 hours a week. Marketing doesn't have to do X, Y, Z. You know, our tickets we're just churning through these, but then you're kind of missing the forest for the trees because you're at jeopardy of losing a $500,000 contract there.
Exactly. And I think it's hard. It's fast to implement AI, but it's hard to build brand and keep brand. And you can, once that collapses, it's really hard to get back.
It also feels like if you didn't follow your process and keep the records that you're suggesting that people keep, then it's also going to be really hard to find the smoking gun if you start to see that all of a sudden you're having, like, the metrics are reflecting that people are having a worse experience. If the issue is that it's the way that these tools are interacting with one another, it's not necessarily going to be reflected of like, oh, when we deployed feature B on, January 7th, we saw this decline. So like it's really going to cost you a lot in the long run because you're not going to be able to reverse engineer what the heck happened here and why are people having a bad experience.
And those receipts, I mean, I'm talking about like it's going to be a retroactive thing. There's no reason why you can't have another part of your AI monitoring those in real time and noticing discrepancies like, oh, we're off this, we're off tone. The customers are starting to like not be happy. We always do these NPS scores at the end of every quarter. You're going to have NPS scores in real time all the time. And suddenly branding, which was always this qualitative thing that, most CFOs, and others don't really take seriously, is going to become this very powerful tool because once this is quantified to a degree, you can actually see this thing increase or decrease as you go. I'll give you a simple example for anybody who's not technical. It's so simple. Think about Canva or like Adobe Express. You load up your brand colors and your typography, right? And once that's locked in, you can just start making designs and it will always be on brand. That's just the design part of it. Now, imagine if it's messaging now, and your company values, and that's getting layered into the actual output. Now you have something that is going to be much more powerful and is actually going to grow over time because it's going to get sharper and sharper. And also be looking at like, oh, our sales are going up when we talk more about stuff in this aspect. That's the hardest. That's always something that's like where I come in and this data has been sitting there for a year that no one's looking at. And I have to that should all become real time. Remember like when digital media came out, it was so exciting and they sold us on the data. But what was hard was the attribution of the data, right? It was impossible.
It's still hard actually.
It's still hard, but again, with the vectorization of the database, AI can now read this and probably tell us what's going on. Way better than any human could.
I like that example. I spent a summer working as a web designer and learning all about color theory and how, serif versus sans serif, like all these things that seem super in the weeds and nerdy can communicate a sense of trust, can directly lead to whether or not someone thinks you're a scam or legit, The one area that I would push back a bit, and this is less to do with your approach and I think the kind of the pitfalls of the technology in general, is just subjectively as a user of AI, right? You can give it a set of parameters and it will break the parameters that you give it. I mean, there's been tons of reporting on, even Anthropic, one of the more thoughtful companies that's really trying to build in guardrails to these systems, and people finding exploits and pretty simple ways to make AI ignore the rules that you give it. So how are you kind of thinking about those challenges, and what can companies do when these systems do break inevitably?
Well, Gary Vaynerchuk just laid out one of the clearest explanation of what's coming. Okay. He described a world where AI agents order your dinner, shop for your clothes, make purchase decisions without you, right? And his conclusion is that brand is the only thing left, right? So in his example, you walk into the kitchen and you say, Alexa, order dinner for my son's sleepover, 3 friends, 1 lactose intolerant. And the AI handles everything perfectly. But Amazon decided where those sales went and not you, not the restaurants, right? And that's what Gary calls not having a brand. It's the difference between Alexa knowing what pizza is and knowing about your brand. Maybe it's Domino's or whatever. But what he's right about is that it doesn't explain how you build a brand that survives that layer. He knows that this problem's coming and he didn't quite have the solution, but the solution really is understanding what that brain is about. I don't know if I answered your question, but you can ask it again.
No, totally. Just with the nature of these things, it seems that the rules that you give AI systems are not foolproof, and that the systems can break through those rules if prompted in a certain way.
I'm going to get a little nerdy here, but because I'm a filmmaker and you are too, Josh, I think you'll appreciate this. Do you understand what 13 stop footage is, right?
Explain it for
I'll get
our
even more
listeners, because I
I
definitely know what that is.
Nice, I love it. So when you film something like a really high resolution camera, and maybe it's at 15K now, I don't know what they're at now. And this 15K footage, if you look at it, it looks horrible because you can see every black shadow detail and light, and it looks like a flat image, and it's something you would never want to project, but all the information is there, right? And so I have to go into what's called the telecine bay, right? When we're doing something for television, and it has to go down to Rec 709. What that means is 709 is 6 or 7 stops. It's like half the amount of information, right? And you're still trying to give it this point of view, this look, and this style. And you're basically compressing that image to fit into that new container. This is exactly what AI is about. I'm going to take the leadership's brains, and I'm going to get in a session and get everything from there and give that a structure, a logic structure, and definitely rules of permissions and all these other things. And that way you get the guardrails built into your AI, because it's going to have a harder time veering off that. And if you don't do that at all, you definitely will have problems indefinitely. That's for sure. Will it eliminate 100%? Well, Anthropic now has tools that are actually doing this. It's not enough, though. It's tools right out of the box. And the problem is that it's not going to really know everything about you unless you tell it, right? That's what it's going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's also a relationship between the strategy portion, because I definitely feel I don't know if this is I definitely feel, to your point, Josh, the subjective experience of seeing that these tools are really easy to exploit and get them to override their given parameters, right? I think that there's a relationship between extremely broad use cases, because the problem is that the AI is trying to make decisions based off of conflicting information, right? And that's why one of the examples for our listeners that we know is a thing that has been tried is you can exploit a lot of ChatGPT or Claude's abuse and legal parameters around IP or around CSAM or whatever, anything that violates their terms of use. You can get around it if you couch it in dense legalese. So if you type up a really dense legal prompt and send it to ChatGPT, it gets confused by the legalese. And I think that happens most often in chatbots, because chatbots have an extremely broad directive. And there's something to be said for at a brand level for a mid-market company, when there's absolutely no reason to have these extremely broad directed features. You don't need to have your conversation tool that you use to talk to customers. It doesn't need to be able to wax poetic like ChatGPT does. And so the more you can give it those guardrails around what its use case is and what it's supposed to be solving, it gives it less parameters with which it can go haywire.
So Anthropic built constitutional AI because prompt engineering doesn't scale, right?
Yeah.
You can feed PDFs forever. It's never going to scale. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, if Anthropic already built constitutional AI, why do I need Allen's solution, right? Here's the difference. Anthropic's constitution is generic safety. Don't be harmful. Don't discriminate. Don't hallucinate, right? That's the base layer that every model needs, really. The constitution is your brand voice. We never overpromise. We prioritize clarity over cleverness, whatever. We refuse to guilt trip users, even if it boosts retention. That's the layer Anthropic can't build for you. They can't give you the engine. You have to decide what this AI is going to believe about you. And that's probably the most important work you have to do. Otherwise, you have a pile of prompts and you don't have a direction for it. So conscious AI is the principles that survive edge cases.
One of the things we talk about on our show is how users of consumer facing tech can tell if a product is actually useful or not, and what those heuristics are. And we don't necessarily know what they are, but we're sort of collecting that information as we go along with the show. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, when a consumer is experiencing an AI assisted or AI generated product that a brand is selling them, what are some of the things a consumer can look for that you would say, this seems like it's been implemented consciously, it seems like it's been implemented in a way that fits your guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is brand experience AI operating system. So the brand experience is what is taking in account the customer experience and the user experience, right? Where are they coming from? Where do they just come from? What do they need to understand? And that's just branding alone without AI involved at all. But the AI layer just makes that more explicit, and it makes it more actionable. And I think what your question makes me think about this idea of like, maybe it's okay to say that, look, this is an AI experience. Like Duolingo, it's not a human, right? And it's okay because it's a character. So there's a time where you don't need to explain it because it's obvious, but there might be a time where, and if AI, if you ask an AI, like, are you an AI? It should be able to say, yes, I am. And I hope that's okay. And, if you want to talk to a human, you should give them that opportunity to do that if they're not comfortable, for example, and that's okay. We're in a transition period. 100 years from now, this is like going to be no big deal, let alone 5 or 10 years from now. But right now, it's we're all cavemans, like just suddenly with the monolith from 2001, and it's like, okay, it's ready to go. And it's like we have this massive gap we need to like resolve before we start to play with this toy.
Totally. Well, Allen, thank you so much for sharing all your insights. Obviously, we've talked about your book. I'm curious, like, where can people find you? How can they reach out and get your help with stuff? What would you like people to know about your work?
Yeah, my agency is nobledigital.com. You can go there and, that's like a traditional branding agency, but we have the AI aspect. But the actual solution itself is bxaios.com. And that's the actual site for the solution. And of course, there's my name, allenmartinez.net, which is my personal site if you want to reach out to me specifically for something.
Should we go Falcon Mode, Josh?
I think we should.
Falcon Mode is our listener submitted segment where we take your ideas and we figure out how to make them more useful, feasible, fundable. Allen, give us your best Falcon sound.
I wasn't ready for this, but let's see.
Perfect.
There we go. Honestly, you're in the top 50% with that alone. So here's what we got for this week. And this comes from listener Avery. Hey guys, love the show. Thanks, Avery. Google Maps honestly sucks for cycling. It doesn't tell you when bike lanes close. It doesn't tell you the road conditions, and it doesn't tell you general construction. I just want an easy way to plan my route for the day that doesn't end in me fearing for my life. Help me out.
Avery, what I think is funny about this is now our 5th or 6th Falcon Mode where the prompt is, I would like Google, but better. We have an unintentional theme where people like what Google's doing, but it's not working anymore. So they're like, could you improve this Google thing? But Allen, I picked this because I think we picked this one because weirdly, I think this is actually an interesting probabilistic versus deterministic scenario. I'm not a cycler. I don't know if you guys are cyclers. I know that like Strava is an app that a lot of cyclists use. I don't know if it's just got like different features and it's not made for like urban transportation cycling. Like I feel like mountain bikers use it. So there probably are other maps, but I'm going to assume that Avery is an experienced cyclist, has chosen Google Maps for a reason. And it totally makes sense that it does not have up-to-date information. And I'm curious because I feel like because AI is pretty good at taking a pattern and being able to fill in a gap, I'm curious if this might be an interesting use case for like AI generated map with, I'm 70% sure that this road might be closed right now or something like that.
This to me sounds like a data problem. And they have that little car that drives around. Well, how do you figure out a trail? So it needs to go probably from the point of view of a rider. So they need that same eye on a stick on a bike.
The Waymo bike.
They need one of those to go. But then they need hundreds of people because it's going to be so slow. But if they really wanted to solve that problem, you have to go upstream and you have to actually re-record the data from the point of view of a rider or a walker.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
I think there could be something here if we wanted to make like a non-Google alternative to compete with it, where like the whole premise was we have more accurate urban maps with like for bicyclists and probably pedestrians.
Well, I feel like I think All Trails does this already, and All Trails is actually using the user data, so it's actually they're the data. Right?
I'm a big All Trails user because I hike, but again, it doesn't really it's not great at like urban context because it's just like streets. So like, I think there might be something here of, like I'm thinking about like biking around LA.
My city and a My City app all around like,
yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking of. Cause I mean, like right now, for instance, my whole street is closed for construction and like, it's not, Google Maps doesn't know that some mornings it isn't closed. Right. And so, that would probably annoy a bike rider who's trying to transport there. But I'd be curious if there was like, in my head, I'm thinking like, Yeah, it could take, like all Trails and Strava, it could take user-generated suggestions of like, hey, like Google already does this, of like, hey, is that cop still there or whatever? But then maybe use some fill-in-the-gap technology to try to be like, hey, I've gotten 2 reports and I've seen this before, and I think this road might be closed.
I think Surfline for surfers, there's like a user data. You can like report conditions in a certain way, and then it factors that into the forecast, and it has cameras, things like that. So maybe taking inspiration from some other activities.
Yeah, totally. Well, if you have an idea that you think could be solved with technology, or you have a product idea, reach out to us on social media at actuallyusefulpod, or email us at heyactuallyuseful@gmail.com. Great conversation today, guys. Really appreciated all your insights, Alan. And hopefully this inspires our tech operators listening to maybe try to buckle down and get some more due diligence around their AI implementation. So really appreciate your time. And have a great week, everybody. We will see you later. Bye. Actually Useful is part of the Industry Plant Podcast Network. It's co-hosted and created by Ariel Butters, and co-hosted, produced, and edited by Josh Stretton Carlson. If you like the show, please consider subscribing to our Substack or YouTube, or give us a follow on most social media platforms at Actually Useful Pod.